Okay, I'm going to do this video because I wanted to follow up on a video that talked about what would Tacoma do if it basically needed more space because, as you can see, a lot of the land here is being developed and built. So folks have asked, like, what will happen when the city runs out of space? Well, as I mentioned, basically over time you have incremental urbanization, and that's probably one of the best outcomes, if you will, because it's the easiest to do. It requires a lot of money because developers actually have to go in and put up buildings, but it actually is a much easier thing to accomplish, and you're able to house more people at once. So typically the city loves that type of thing. The second thing that I forgot to talk about was annexation. And I came from a city where it used to annex land and literally just continue to chop off small bits of farmland. Usually, a farmer is willing to sell the land if the city, and I'm talking Bowling Green, Kentucky, if they wanted to put an industrial park and they needed a place to actually put it, they would go to these farmers and say, hey, if you ever want to sell that land, we will buy it. And so Bowling Green has slowly over time added more and more space to the city, and it could do that. Tacoma, on the other hand, is somewhat limited because you start to run into other cities that do exist. However, with that said, there is a lot of what's called unincorporated land. This is land that does not belong to any sort of city. It has a name. So what comes to mind is Midland, Parkland, those Spanaway. Those are unincorporated parts of the area. So they are tended to by the sheriff. So the sheriff department, the county, if you will, takes care of all of their needs, right? Some people love it because there's a lot less restrictions than if you have a city government, but you also give up on a lot of conveniences that people here take for granted. So you won't have, the fire service or the police and the library system and the schools and the different things that come with having a city. Not to say they don't have those things, they do, but it is usually a lot better in terms of what they're able to get versus what they pay. A lot of times folks don't like it because when they're annexed, basically they're thinking their taxes will go up. Sometimes they will actually have lower taxes because you're now leveraging the entire city when it comes to things like utilities. So it's a little bit different. And also when we're talking about services and things like that. So in Tacoma, we have those cities I mentioned, which are, they're not technically cities, but areas such as Midland and Parkland and Spanaway and all those. And there's others that extend towards the south. Technically, Tacoma can annex that land over time. Anything that touches the border of Tacoma, if it's unincorporated, then it is likely that it could be annexed. Obviously, the city would have to agree to do that, and the voters in that area that's affected would have to agree to doing this, and would have to make a lot of sense, meaning that all the utilities and everything are there. It's a big enough piece of land to where the city will reap benefits off of taxes from businesses and residential folks. And it has to all just work, right? It's a little bit more challenging, but the city slowly will grow. There's an area that recently was annexed in Tacoma as of April of 2024. And it's called the Manitou neighborhood or Manitou area. And it's about 420 people that lived in an area that has businesses, homes. There's at least an apartment building there. And it's in basically just an area where on one side you have the city of University Place, and then on the other three sides you have the city of Tacoma. So you literally have this perfect rectangle of an area that is unincorporated. So a few years back, the city initiated this policy of annexation. All the things lined up. There was a vote by the people to say yes in that area. Yes, we want to do it. And so just as of this year, April, that land has been annexed. Now it's 37 acres. It's not a lot of land, but that slow incremental addition of land is key. There's a lot of places like this, and they're called unincorporated islands, if you will. And so those islands basically just exist throughout areas that were basically zoned and annexed over time, and maybe a property owner didn't want to sell or whatever the case may be, and you just have all these areas where you may have a city on all three corners of you, but you're not getting the same services. You have to wait on the sheriff, or you have to wait on the county to basically help you, or what have you. And the conveniences are probably a lot greater the other way, right? It's a controversial thing. Some people say yes, some people say no. The bigger chunks of land would be something like a Midland. If Midland was annexed, it also is on all three corners of Midland is the city of Tacoma. And if Tacoma did decide to take Midland over, that is a large area, over 3 square miles, that would then turn into the city of Tacoma. So you would then have a service for 10,000 people that they didn't have before, which is pretty much the entire of all city services. So they would be able to have access to that, whereas now they currently don't. So in that instance, the city grows by adding more land. A lot of that's going to be business and residential, and it has to make sense for the city to do so. It's expensive. So it has to make sense in terms of enough people, enough businesses that pay taxes that will really help the city overall, and the city can leverage services in those areas, and it all makes sense. It all pencils. So to answer your question, the second thing is annexation, and then the other thing is incorporation. A lot of times, and annexation and incorporation are two different things. Incorporation means that these areas basically form their own city. And so they would have to create their own police and fire and all the services that cities have, park department, school, all of that would have to be created within that city. And in order to do that, you have to prove financially that you're able to do it, and you have to set up everything that needs to be done. And it is extremely expensive. And that is something that some cities are considering doing here, but the problem with that is the cost. There's no way they can raise that type of funding and take that type of buildup to do. So essentially, there was something that was studied a few years back. I think the state did, to see if they could make a large city to the south of Tacoma and just incorporate all these different cities together. But financially, it just doesn't make any sense. And really, at the end of the day, it probably is better sense for those people to eventually be absorbed into Tacoma. Not a lot of people will agree with that, possibly, but that makes more sense for the foreseeable future. But anyhow, wanted to basically give that little bit of information as well, because there's a few different ways the city can grow. The easiest way by far is when the city goes through and zones additional land to where it can be more dense. And so that has happened. So there's things they can do to encourage more mixed use and denser buildings, bigger buildings. And so eventually you're going to see most of what the city can do to be a little bit more urbanized. So areas now along transit corridors, those are more urbanized areas as far as the way this is a simple way of saying it, the way the city sees it. So those areas that have a bus line running through it, you could put up a denser building than, say, an area that doesn't. And so that's kind of how the city is looking at it now. At least people have options for transportation to move around, and it can support that type of development. So the city does that. In addition, all of these other areas that are getting more denser, smaller neighborhoods like the Dome District, basically the city will work whatever magic they need to, whatever levers they need to encourage more density in that area. And that's what you're seeing now. So there's things that can do easier and short term and complicated still, or they can lay the groundwork for years of basically process and legalities to basically annex additional land. Eventually the city will probably at some point annex additional pieces of land. Probably it would be these couple of different unincorporated islands, because it makes more sense to do that. They probably would go that direction before going towards a bigger area, such as like a Midland or a Parkland or something like that. So anyhow, tell me what your thoughts are. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for the original question in terms of, how does the city actually navigate itself as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's less and less land. So thank you for that question. It's a two-parter, really. One, in terms of the city kind of encouraging more urbanization, and two, adding more land slowly through annexation. So anyhow, thank you so much for the question. Until next time, I will see you. Take care.